Town, Indiana, in the northwest corner. I grew up in a little town called Cedar Lake, Indiana. I went to Crown Point High School, and I was always into motorsport stuff. You know, everything that we could take apart and put back together, we were doing, me and my buddies. And I think when I got to about the high school level, I had a friend who, he and his dad were racing a late model stock car, and they asked if I would come help. And so, of course, I was thrilled to be on a race team, and we would go out on Saturday nights and try not to blow up our stuff, and would come back and try and learn all week what we could do to make it better. And so I think my story is similar to a lot of people's, in that you start out with a passion and want to learn everything you can, so you work on anything they'll let you until your skills grow. Well, I would have been probably 16, 17, and my friend was maybe a year or two older than me. So, of course, like everything else, you know, you start out doing sort of the menial tasks. I was never good, because I was small and scrawny. I was never good as like the jack man or the tire guy, because I couldn't like toss these big giant heavy things around. But I had a real knack for the engine side of stuff, and so I loved to be the guy that got to check the ignition timing and, you know, swap the jets and the carburetor and the power valves, and so check the spark plugs after every run. You know, take stuff that was engine related and really sort of nerd out on it. Rather than just like, here, jack up this car and clean the rubber off the back. I was never really that guy. A, because I just wasn't that passionate about that stuff, and B, I just wasn't built for it, you know. So there's so much of a canyon of difference between street car stuff and real competition and race stuff, where, you know, on the street, you know, you'd basically go out and do a burnout, or you might, you know, hang out at the Dairy Queen on Saturday night and rev up your engine, and, you know, everybody talked about how good their stuff was or how fast their stuff was, but for the most part, there was never any way to prove it. And so I think the biggest difference between that and being able to be a part of a race team that went to a racetrack and put yourself out there directly in competition with others, you find out how quickly you find out, like, I think I'm pretty awesome and my stuff's really fast, to like, whoa, there's some serious guys out here that I could be learning from, and there's way more for us to work on and do. And so I think just the value of the motorsport community in terms of competition is the ability to grow, because you sort of rise to the level of your competition, right? So if nobody's pushing you to do better, you just sort of sit back and think, well, it's as good as I need to be, it's as far as I need to go. And so early on, you learn that lesson of humility pretty quickly in racing, when you show up at the track thinking, I have the coolest thing ever, and you know, put it back on the trailer that night going, oof, wait, we have some work to do. It was a very long time before we had any success. But I think what you learn from that is the sort of stick-to-itiveness, that determination and grit. You learn those early on in life. That's something that if you don't get early in life, it's going to be really difficult to get later in life. You just have to be willing to take those lumps, and, you know, and we did. We went out there, and, you know, I don't know that we finished last, but there was a lot of times we didn't finish at all because we crashed the car, or, you know, we had an engine failure or a flat tire, or any number of things that can you know, scuttle a perfectly good race weekend. So I think it was a huge lesson in humility, especially for a cocky, arrogant, you know, 16, 17, 18-year-old kid thinking that you have the world by the tail and you got all the answers. Yeah, it's very humbling.
Did it start to deviate your post-high school trajectory, you know, away from college or towards college, trade school, or did you fall right into racing?
I think for me, growing up in a small town, I grew up feeling like there wasn't that much opportunity for me. Whether that's true or not, that was just the mentality that I had. And so I think my trajectory was kind of set already in terms of, I'm going to get out of this small town by joining the military. And so for me, I went off to the Navy and just thought, this is my way of getting away from, you know, graduating high school and either becoming a local mechanic or a construction worker or some other perfectly good blue-collar trade that just wasn't that interesting to me. And I had no idea if or how I would ever get into the motorsports industry. I just knew that I wanted to go see the world. So I would say that that's probably a yes and a no. It definitely changed my trajectory in that going off and seeing the rest of the world made me realize that is really what I want to do, is get back to motorsports. But at the same time, I don't think it had a big course change immediately. It was probably way more long-term than I realized at the time. Well, most of my time in the Navy, I spent trying to get back to motorsports. So I literally, we would be on a big ship and we'd go out to sea and not come back for 6 months or more at times. And so before we would leave, I would load up on every book that I could buy. I would go to the, Barnes and Nobles of the time and the booksellers of the time and buy the, all the magazines, Hot Rod Magazine and Carcraft and all that stuff. As well as, though, I realized for me, I wanted it to be way more science than magic. And so I literally went and bought like college textbooks, physics and thermodynamics and math. And then I got people to tutor me via email. So people who were not in the military that were just mentors and friends, and they would send me little projects to work on or, homework assignments or whatever. And so that way I felt like I was preparing myself for when I got out of the military so that I could be useful in the job community of motorsports, right? So at that time I wanted to know about carburetors and distributors and cranks and rods and pistons, and so I did a lot of that learning while I didn't have much else to do. So I had a guy in San Diego that sort of hired me and let me work in his engine shop, a guy named Dave Arce, and I always credit him with giving me my start because he didn't have to. I was maybe 20 or 21 years old, and I kind of met him through a friend, and he had this engine shop in San Diego, and I thought, hey, can I work here? Like, do you need somebody to sweep floors? And so he was kind enough to let me do that and start with parts washing and start with, really minimal tasks. But man, did I learn a lot there, because they were really, in my opinion, they were a pretty high volume shop. They were doing, 30 or more engines a month. And so I got to see Chevys and Fords and Oldsmobiles and Chryslers and Toyotas and Mazdas. And so I learned a lot about the nuts and bolts of engines, if you will, in terms of the basic machining side and why things needed to be so clean and the preparation and assembly. And then I would go to all the weekend car shows and drag races, and I was building a network of relationships. So literally, by the time I exited the Navy, I already had a job. I literally left the ship and went to my truck that was parked on the base and drove to my job that day. I started working the day that I left the military. There was never really, at least initially, there was never really a pause. That said, my dream gig, my dream job didn't really last that long, because I think the reality of the day-to-day set in, and you realized as a young guy, like, what it seems like isn't always what it is, right? And so you kind of have to learn that it's not always just fun and being on the dyno and tuning engines, and a lot of times there's just menial, difficult, dirty work that has to get done. That doesn't pay very well. And so when that particular job ended, I then had a little bit of a pause. It was the longest period in my life that I was unemployed. It was 10 days. And I remember thinking, like, what am I going to do? Am I going to keep searching, or am I just going to go back home, which for me at the time was Indiana, and now I'd lived in California because of the Navy for, several years now. And I think I woke up one morning, and I always thought I was just one day I would eventually go back home. And I woke up one morning and I thought, well, wait a minute, I am home. Like, this is where I live. And so why not try to make a go of it here? So I ended up taking a job as a regular mechanic, which I had absolutely no idea or skills or training or anything. And I went to this interview, and this guy, Adam, who owned this great little shop in California, I was honest with him. I said, I don't know very much about regular cars. I've only done race cars, but I understand about this and this, and I was really, really into EFI and fuel injection and what made it tick. And so he thought, well, maybe you'd make a good drivability tech, diagnostic technician. So again, a terrific guy gave me a shot, and so I rolled my toolbox over there, and I lasted there probably, I don't know, a good couple of years learning that craft, which is totally different than race car stuff. So, it's a difficult question to say, did your 21-year-old self deserve that opportunity? And I think I would say, looking back, I was arrogant, I was cocky, I was a know-it-all, I was probably a real pain in the butt to everybody around me, and super annoying because I was always asking why. I was always questioning everything. And that's a trait that's pretty much hung around even till today, and it still annoys people today. What I find is people get really defensive if you start saying why and questioning whether or not it's the truth. And And I never necessarily meant that to be agitative or aggressive. I was legitimately just saying, like, how do we know for sure, right? And so I've always felt like racing engines and engine development should be way more science than religion. And what I've found is that throughout the motorsports community, so much of it is really just religion, right? We have this one guy that we sort of worship at the altar of his greatness because he's won so many races or built so many engines, and so we just don't question their authority. So I think that was tough for a lot of people when I was young because I had that personality with zero knowledge or credibility. But did I deserve the chance? Yeah, because I think what makes the difference and what I look for in the young guys today is, are you hungry? Are you willing to do the things that are difficult and dirty and hard, that are not fun, that are not glamorous, so that you can get to those other things? And so much of our society wants this instant gratification. I want to start on day one and be making $35 an hour, and I'll just run the dyno, and I don't want to have to do any of the other stuff that it takes to do that. So I really like to sort of lead by example, and like every part in our shop in the engines I touch. I get in there and clean in the solvent tank. I get in there and measure stuff, because I feel like there's a couple of things. First of all, I don't want to ask somebody to do something that I'm not willing to do. And also, I feel like as an engine builder, you have to have an intimate relationship with every part of the engine. And so oftentimes when we disassemble an engine, you find things in the cleaning process that you get to look at and see how the wear patterns are and all that get missed if we just make the new kid do it. So I try to find a balance there. There was two things that I really learned through that time working as a mechanic. One was the sort of the necessity of the business side of working on cars and engines, and that if all we ever want to do is the fun, passionate stuff, it's really tough to make a living. And so I had to sort of work through in my head this concept of like, well, here's a job that's available that pays X number of hours on book time, and you've got to be able to complete this job in a reasonable amount of time that would make you make money. And so I think that was a big shift from, I just want to work on racing engines that are neat and cool and shiny and everything's perfect, and to the reality of the business side. And I had to grow a lot through that. And having said that, probably one of the biggest life lessons that I learned there was that owner of the facility, Adam, had told me one day, I don't work Saturdays and I don't work Sundays. And I learned a long time ago that if you don't take care of your body and yourself and your brain, that you won't be able to take care of your business. And I remember at the time thinking like, oh my gosh, there's no way. Like, I have to work all 7 days to be able to make enough money and get enough done. And like, how would you ever get to be at a point in life when you're so, at the time I was thinking, when you're so wealthy that you wouldn't have to work weekends. But that lesson stuck with me over the years, especially after growing and having kids and a family, and you just realize that it wasn't that I couldn't afford not to work weekends. It was that literally I couldn't afford to work weekends, because if you give every minute of yourself away, then there's not enough left over of you for all the other things in life that matter. And I think there's a maturity there that happens from young guys to older guys, where you realize, look, I don't care how cool this stuff is and all the accolades and all the cool engines and all the things we do, there will always be another engine that needs your attention, and you will always be only as good as the last race that you ran. And so I think there's a certain amount of emptiness that comes with giving everything you have away for this somewhat meaningless goal, right? Like to win a trophy on a weekend that's only as good as last weekend, right? Because when we show up next week, everybody's got the same ability to beat you. And I think if that's the only thing in your life you ever focus on, then you lose out a lot of the other richness that life has to offer, with family and travel and other things that life has to offer. I met my wife after I left the mechanic shop. I went off for a very short period of time to work for another race team, which was sort of another, like, this is going to be great, dream come true kind of thing. And that was fun. It was educational. It was good. But it led to me starting my very first business with a partner. And that went on for a couple of years, and it was very much a struggle mentally, physically, and financially. Again, I was still in that mode where you just gave everything away for this goal. And it was at the end of that, as honestly as sort of the wheels were coming off and it was falling apart, when I met my wife. And so, funny story about that. When I first met my wife, I had just literally made this decision to sort of close my shop and admit that it was a failure and find something else to do. I didn't really 100% know exactly what that other thing was gonna be, but I remember her parents weren't that excited about the idea. So luckily it all worked out okay. But I remember that being definitely a period of uncertainty. You know, uncertainty is one of the only certainties that we have in life, right? You're always going to be unsure about what's coming next. And I don't care if that's the outcome of a sporting event or a day fishing or building an engine and putting it on the dyno or showing up at a racetrack. And so I think over the years, just the natural course of maturity has helped me learn how to cope with that uncertainty, right? And so what we do is we start with a whole bunch of courage, which is basically the willingness to do something even though it's scary or that we know it's going to be painful, and we do it anyway. But over time, what happens is through that action, you develop consistency. And consistency is sort of the antidote for uncertainty, right? Like you become more willing to depend on certain things or certain people delivering as promised. And so the lesson that I took away from that is basically you just have to keep going, and you have to commit and complete the things that you start and do the things you say you're going to do, which have been terrific lessons for me to pass on to my kids. You know, the idea that, you know, courage is nothing more than just doing it anyway, even though you're scared and even though you're not sure how it's going to work out, do it anyway. Because the alternative is sitting home on the couch and not going to the racetrack or not building an engine and put it on the dyno and then saying, I could have, would have, should have, and wish that I had. I think you end up with a lot of regret that way. I rarely ever regret the things that I tried to do and failed at, but man, do I have regrets over things that I wish I would have and didn't, you know.
It's kind of a harsh question, I guess, but tell me about your most memorable failure and what you ultimately kind of learned and grew from it.
Well, I have way more memorable failures than I have successes, and that is definitely the nature of the business. But there were some big ones, man. I mean, huge ones. I was, 25 or 6 years old, and I mentioned before that I was sort of closing down or wrapping up my first attempt at having a business. And to be perfectly transparent and honest, that ended in a bankruptcy. I had so much equipment that we had bought on credit thinking, field of dreams, right? If you build it, they will come. So I got to have all this really high-end, super nice equipment, and I got to have all this stuff. And then it became a math problem, right? How many cylinder heads do I have to work on every month? And how many dyno sessions do I have to do? And the grind of that, when it didn't pay off, really wears you down. And so for me, that was devastating. That was the ultimate failure of you tried to do something and failed in the most spectacular way possible. And it changed a lot of my just psyche, the way that I thought about things. And so then what I mean is I don't have any masters. I own everything because I went from the mentality of instant gratification. Let's just take out all these easy to get loans and buy all this fancy equipment so I can have everything right now, to a 20-year span of let me save up some money and buy this one piece of equipment, and then I'll save up some money and buy a different piece of equipment. And so over the years, I've accumulated, a shop that would be nearly impossible to replicate without millions of dollars now, without any debt. And that allowed me to have the freedom to do all those other things in life that matter just as much or more than working on racing engines.
What are one of the things you have done that you would have regretted the most if you had not?
Well, EFI University to start with. It was super scary to step off into this unknown when there was no such thing as an industry that taught people motorsports related stuff. No such thing as a school that you could go to learn how to tune a competition or a racing engine. So the idea that I was just going to brazenly start a school when I didn't even go to school myself, like I got out of high school, but I didn't go to college. I didn't know anything about education and how to be an educator. It was pretty intimidating, and there was a whole bunch of reasons why I shouldn't do that, and I felt like not doing it, or when I started I wanted to quit. And I can only it's almost scary to think about what our industry and our world would look like if we hadn't done that almost 20 years ago. I think EFI University started without me. Not literally, but sort of, I guess, philosophically, because the very first thing that I ever did, June 23rd, 2003, a date that I remember very vividly, I had to be sort of talked into doing it. I had this idea for like a little one-day weekend seminar type idea where I had all these friends that were engine builders that were older guys and didn't know a lot about this newfangled computer stuff. So I thought, well, I'll just make some bullet points and I'll just share with my buddies. And the word got out that I was going to do that, and it turned into an invitation to go to Texas to do it. And I thought, oh, I can't do that. That would take lots of money. I'd have to buy a plane ticket and a hotel and a rental car. And, I was struggling financially at the time, trying to keep the wheels on this little business that I was growing or trying to grow with the engine shop. And so through encouragement from several other people, I decided to take that leap and went and did it. And I thought, there's no way you're going to find 6 or 7 or even 8 people that are going to pay money to come hear some guy talk about fuel injection, But I was wrong, thankfully, and like 24 people showed up. And I was like, whoa, that's unbelievable. That was such an amazing fluke. But only like a week or so later, I started to get emails pouring in saying, we heard about what you did. Come do it here. And one guy was pretty adamant and wanted me to come all the way to New Jersey. You got to remember, at the time, I lived in California, so New Jersey's a long way away, which means a more expensive plane ticket and more days on the road and rental car and hotels and meals. And I just thought, that was a fluke what happened in Texas. That's not going to happen again. But through encouragement from others saying, yes, it will, I said, okay, I'm going to try it. Well, 32 people showed up. And then all of a sudden I was like, well, hang on a minute. Like, okay, I've been wrong twice in a row. Because I didn't really believe in what was there, right? And to me, in my head, it was always just a one-day, let's talk about fuel injection seminar. Well, at the time, I was sharing a house and living with a roommate, and his name was Jonathan. And we were just cool guys, we were like buddies that went skydiving on the weekends and did all kinds of crazy stuff. And he approached me one day and said, hey man, I want to have lunch with you. And my first reaction was, uh-oh, that means he probably is going to tell me that like he's going to move out and I'm going to have to find a new place to live. And I was just, darn it, So we go to lunch though, and it was totally different than what I expected. He goes off and tells me this whole story of his life and career and how he was climbing this corporate ladder in San Jose, California. And he had this unique specialty at the time, 20 years ago, in online marketing and website development and, creative digital concept design, imaging, all this stuff. And so anyway, what it came down to is he said, I've been watching what you've been doing, and I don't think that you understand the potential that you have. And I thought, well, you're probably right about that, because I don't feel like I have any potential. So he goes on to explain how he's been watching these courses I've been teaching and how he thinks that there could be way more to it, and essentially volunteered to help me build a business model and a business plan and go to work for me. The only problem was I thought, how are you going to go to work for me when you already are, like, we live together? I don't make very much money. How would I ever pay you? And he pretty much said, like, I believe in this way more than you do, enough that I'm just going to work for free on commission until I'm either broke or you I prove you right and we can both make money. And so he did. That was pretty cool. Like end of 2003 and early 2004, he pretty much took over, building. I can't say growing the business because I didn't think there was one. It was just a hobby I was doing, and built a website and a whole business plan and a model. And so, by the summer of 2004, we were booming. We were teaching classes almost every weekend, and I was traveling, remotely to towns to give classes. And, it was mainly because of his belief in something that I didn't believe in and his encouragement to follow it, that it happened. Because honestly, I didn't see it. So that's why I say EFI University started without me. And over the years, it's grown, and we've started down in Temecula, California. For a while, we moved to San Diego, California, and eventually ended up in our main headquarters here in Lake Havasu, Arizona. But over the years, I think we've taught our courses in something like 9 or 10 different countries. Tens of thousands of people have learned about engines and tuning through this thing that Jonathan and I started together back in 2003. So I'm pretty proud of that. I'm glad that I didn't chicken out and I didn't lack the courage to try it.
In the context of your friend who helped you out, how important is it to surround yourself with people who are supportive and who do see value in you that you may not?
Well, look, it should not be a big secret to people that you are influenced by the people you surround yourself with. So, if you hang around with a bunch of deadbeats and losers and people that don't believe in themselves, then you're not going to believe in yourself. And if you hang around with people that are motivated and self-starters and positive outlooks, you will naturally gravitate to be like that, And so I agree with you. I think a lot of people say, oh, well, it's not what you know, it's who you know. You just got to know the right people. And I don't agree with that because I didn't know any of the right people when I started. I was a small town kid from Indiana that signed up to join the Navy just so I could get out of town. So I had zero, way to benefit from relationships at that point. And so what happens is you go and you do what you can do. And I think everybody just wants to have a lot of powerful relationships right off the bat. But the problem is that relationships by nature take time to grow. You meet somebody and they may influence you or you may influence them, but you don't have a true relationship with them without experience, which takes time to grow. And so I used to tell the young guys all the time, they'd say, what's your secret and how do you get to stay around so long? And I would say well, I think the secret is if you want to be around in this industry for a long time, you have to be around in this industry for a long time. What I mean by that is you can't give up and you can't quit and you can't throw your arms up and say, well, everybody else has it easy but me. Because no matter who it is, they're struggling in one way or another. Whether it shows on their Instagram feed or in their face or in their daily life or not, everybody's got something they're struggling and fighting and worried about and, have anxiety from. So if you're the one that gives up and quits, then you won't be around for a long time. So if you want to be around a long time, you got to stay around a long time.
You spend a lot of time talking about kind of things you've learned around racing motors in your life. Your students obviously come to you for very technical skill, but as a teacher, you always have a personal agenda. So what are some of the things you try and pass along?
No question about it. I'm very cautious with my students, and one of the first things that I tell almost every student on the first day that I meet them is that it's important that they don't believe anything I say. Because I'm trying to instill in them that same level of curiosity that I had. And what I don't want to do is build some sort of cultish religion where they just think I'm this guru, and if I said it, then it's gospel, and that's just the way it is. Instead, what I try to teach all of my students is I never try to tell them what to think or how, what they need to do. I try to teach them how to be problem solvers and how to think for themselves and be inquisitive, because then you don't have to rely on anybody else for answers or help or whatever. You have the ability to go find it, the answer to your problem. You just need the willingness to go seek it out. And so if you asked what my personal agenda is, it's probably way more about teaching young people how to think for themselves, because that's what people did for me when I was in that spot. So the question of nature versus nurture is interesting because I often wonder about that myself. Did you just have some raw natural ability that nobody else has? And I definitely don't think that's the case. But I think it is a little bit of both. I think you have to have a sort of inbuilt natural curiosity, but I also think that you have to be watered in an environment that doesn't squash that out. I think about kids that go to boarding school or finishing school where, if you step out of line, they smack your hand with the ruler kind of thing, where it's sort of drilled into you to not question authority and not ask questions. And so I won't say that I grew up in that kind of household at all, but I did grow up in a household where my father had natural curiosity and was willing to take things apart and figure out how they work. I have this distinct memory as a kid of our washing machine broke down, and rather than go buy a new one, it was this old Sears Kenmore thing, and my dad took it all apart, and he'd never worked on one before, and figured out what was wrong, and and got it all back together. And next thing you know, we had our washing machine. But I remember what was funny about it is he had taken a piece of tape and taped over the Kenmore, and my dad's name was Bob, and so he wrote Bob Moore. And for me, that was a lesson that stuck. Hey, you can figure it out if you're willing to, and worst case is you fail and we still have to buy a new washing machine, but I might as well try, right? And that was just a funny lesson. And so I don't even think when it's nurture that somebody's intentionally programming you to behave or act or do or think a certain way. I just think it's the leadership by example. And so in my own career, I think those are traits that have made a big difference. I guess the moral to the story is it would be easy for somebody to walk in here and look at all that we've accomplished, all that we've accumulated, all the accolades, and think, man, those guys, or he specifically, me, were super lucky, or have somehow managed to benefit where others haven't. I think more than anything, what I would want people to know is I'm not special. I did not start with any privilege. I didn't start with any advantage. I feel like every day when I get up and go to work, I haven't done enough. I feel like I didn't try hard enough yesterday, or last week, or last month. And so every day I get up and just try to be a little tiny bit better. It doesn't have to be a slam dunk home run every single day. I just need to be 1% better than I was yesterday. And if I can do that over the long period of time, I'll turn back and look and go, wow, I'm definitely a better person, a better engine builder, a better instructor, a better whatever thing it is that I'm chasing. But I think that it's the cumulative effect of just trying a little bit harder each day that's helped me get where I am. There was never a light switch. There was never a moment where it was like, finally, I got to this pinnacle or this peak and that's it, I did it. I never feel like I made it. And today, I feel like there's so much more that I don't know about that I want to know about, or that I could achieve if I just tried a little bit harder. And I'll be honest with you, that's a tough life to live, right? Like never being content with what I already accomplished. So if I could pass that sort of sentiment or mentality along to anybody that comes through my school, I think it'll do them good because it has